Hello everyone, this is General Hand Grenade. Welcome to my war room in Prince George, British Columbia. Yesterday I made a video on convoy raiding, or maybe it was 2 days ago, I can't remember now. I made a bunch of videos this past weekend and it all had to do with combat because I didn't want to make one video with all of them and all of the different types of combat in it. I wanted to split them up. But one of the videos that I made on convoy raiding there, I made a couple of big mistakes in it. And so I thought I'd just remake that video. It's one thing to make a couple of slight errors in it, but I had actually got a couple of things wrong. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that I'm new to this game, and so I'm still trying to learn the rules. And so I kind of misunderstood one of the rules. The other one was just one that I just flat out made a mistake on. I knew the rule, but I had got it wrong. And that's because of the other reason why you make mistakes doing this. And that is that it's difficult to make videos. My friend that pointed out my mistakes there, Rank Carcass, he can attest to that now that he is making his own videos. Like it looks easy, you know, you just set your camera down and you point to a bunch of shit and you go, yeah, this is what happens, right? It all sounds so easy, but it's actually kind of difficult because you're juggling a lot of things. For me, I can make Axis and Allies videos a little easier because I know the rules to that game and I've played it for many, many years, right? So to me, it's second nature. I don't have to look at a rule book. But here I'm looking at the rule book and I'm trying to get the camera right and I'm trying to remember everything, and you know, like it's not second nature to me. So anyway, my apologies for getting that wrong. And I do I've made some other mistakes as well on other videos, but they're just minor mistakes. So I'm not sure that I'm ever going to go back and redo the whole video like I'm going to on this one. But this is a pretty short video, and so it's only been out for a day or so. So I thought I'd just remake this one. I've got the time to do it today before I go to work later. So anyway, let's get into this. This is convoy raiding. So the first thing we're going to talk about is convoy lines. And you see this white line here, the dotted line. And let me just pick the camera up and show you here. There are these white lines all over the map that go through the seas. And in each one of them has a name for it too. I'm just going to walk around and show you these lines. What these lines are is that they represent the convoy lines in the world. These are traditional shipping routes. And but it's not actual lines, right? What it is they're simulating ships. These lines here represent ships, and we're not talking about transport ships that transport troops. What we're talking about here is merchant ships. So, and it was a big deal in the war to try to get supplies, right? You know, America was getting supplies to England on that line up there that you see that I'm going to demonstrate there. That was a very important shipping line, right? And you'll find that most of the lines on the board are for the Allies because they had to ship their stuff over distances, right? Germany was fairly self-contained in here because they're in a landmass, right? And most of the fight takes place on this Eurasia, I call it. It's Europe and Asia. But the Allies, they have to travel across the seas to get their supplies to the war effort, which mostly took place on that continent of Eurasia, right? But anyway, like you look at here, like this convoy line is called the Indian Ocean line. So all of the convoy lines on here are labeled. And then you'll also see little symbols here. Like here's the FEC symbol, there's a French symbol, and there's a Dutch symbol, and then there's also numbers. There's 3, 1, and 2. And that means that you could raid this convoy line and take off 3 IPPs for the British player, 1 IPP for the French player, and 2 IPPs for the Dutch player. And that's a maximum of that. Like you might not get that many off. Here's one for the Americans here, this line here. This is the Manila line. It goes from San Francisco to Philippines. I think there's only one for the Japanese, and that's this line here. It's worth 5 though. It's worth quite a bit. And there's one for the Italians in here. It goes through the Mediterranean. But that's not just the Italians; it's also the French and the British. So either side could raid that one. And there's only one for the Russians, but curiously, it doesn't have a number on it, so I don't know what that's about. Like here's one for the Russians here, but it doesn't have a number on it. So I'm going to have to ask Will about that. And here's one for the Germans right in here, convoy line. So anyway, like I said, that represents merchant ships that convoyed supplies to where they were needed near the front lines, right? So what you're doing here is you're using submarines to raid those convoy lines. In other words, you're using submarines to sink the merchant ships on these lines. And if you know anything about World War II, and I'm guessing that you do if you play this game, then you know that this was a really big one. The German U-boats, they hunted in wolf packs, and they sunk as many ships as they could, merchant ships. And they went after the merchant ships instead of the warships, because merchant ships didn't fight back, right? I mean, they had their escorts, but you know, like the submarines would get in there, sink a couple of ships, and then dive again and go and hide, right? They were just trying to starve the Allies out of supplies. So anyway, those are the convoy lines, and so to raid them, what you need to do is you need to move your subs to those lines. Now I've already put this up here, but you can go up to your maximum range, right? Like you could start up here, for instance. Subs go 3 spaces normally, but you could, you know, like your bases, your naval bases, your submarine bases, that will add 1. But let's just say we're going to go from here and we're going to go down here on attack move. Like this is your combat movement, right? Combat movement phase. And I use these little chips here, and I think these are a good idea that you can get these at historical board gaming. Use these little chips to remind yourself that you're going to convoy that line there, because you've got a bunch of other attacks to do too, probably, right? Like if that's the only thing you're going to do, then that's one thing. You can just put that over there and roll your dice, right? But chances are you're going to do some land attacks, maybe some strategic bombing or whatever, right? So if you put these on there, then you know that this sub here is going to convoy raid. And when you see on the lines here, like this, there's 2 lines that converge in this zone. That means that this sub can raid this line here. That's the London Halifax line, or it could raid this line here, which is the Soviet Arctic line. There's even places where they split into 3, like right there, where that sub is down there. There's 3 lines down there, so he could raid up to the sum of all those lines. Now, when you do go to raid, you raid one at a time, 1 sub at a time. So even if you had 2 subs in this zone here, you would still roll these one at a time. You would roll 1 sub, and you would roll for the escorts, and we'll talk about escorts in a couple minutes. And then you would find out how much money to take off of the British, and then the escorts would try to shoot the sub, and then that would be done. And then you would roll for the next one, and you'd go through the whole same process again. So it's not just about you wouldn't just add up the subs. Even though you add up the escorts, you don't add up the subs. They're not cumulative. They hunt on their own. But again, these subs and anything on the board, as you know, that doesn't just represent 1 submarine, right? Like that represents a whole bunch of submarines. Just like everything on the board represents a whole bunch of that type of unit. So a bunch of subs were raiding, and then a bunch more came in and raided, right? But you roll them separately. Okay, so to raid the combat line, what you do is you move your sub in there, and then what you will do is you will raid the one with the highest number first. So there's only one. When I say number, I'm talking about this blue box here with the number 5 in it. There's only 1 number in there. There's only 1 symbol. But like where I showed you down there, where there was 3 of them, you would raid the one with the largest number first. So that one over there would be the British one. So you roll the dice, and like here, if it comes out at say 5, then you would take 3 off the British one, and then the next highest one would be the Dutch. Then you would take 2 off the Dutch. If you had 6, then you could have taken 1 off the French as well. But you start from highest to lowest, and that's how you how you take off the money. And it would be the British player that rolls back on that particular case over there, because they're the one with the most to lose. And here it's only the British player. So that's it would just be the British player rolling back. Let me just go to the next page here. So then we get into escorts. So the surface warships in a sea zone with a convoy line through it can be designated as escorts by placing an escort marker beneath them during combat movement. You can move up to your full movement before placing the marker. But and that's these markers here, right? You've got the escort duty markers. I've got one under the American over here and one under the British over here, British destroyer. So any type of surface warship you can do this with. You wouldn't do that with a submarine, just with a surface warship, right? But when you have that marker under there, they forfeit any attack during their turn, but they can defend automatically against each unit raiding any member of their alliance and provide a cumulative modifier against the raiding rolls of submarines along the entire convoy line. So these guys both here, regardless of whose line it is, because they're on the same alliance, they will add together their modifiers against the modifiers for the submarine. And in this case, a submarine is a +2. That's a regular submarine, and the modifiers for these guys are +1. So you add these two up, and that'd be +2, and the sub is +2. So that convoy raiding attempt would be even, right? If you add everything up in there. But you would add everything, like there's planes as well, and we'll get to the planes in a minute, but that's just the escorts. So let's carry on here. You can remove that escort marker during the combat movement on the next turn. So that escort marker, you place it when you go on your combat move. So you're kind of deciding on combat move on a certain turn to be an escort, and then you don't remove that marker until the combat movement of the next turn, if you want to. I mean, you could just leave this on here for 10 turns if you wanted to, right? But if you wanted to use that destroyer for something else, then on your combat move you could remove that and then carry on your way, right? When you are on escort duty, you can't blockade somebody. And we've talked about blockades before, where you blockade somebody's naval base. It takes 3 surface warships to blockade a naval base, and that stops the Lend-Lease when you do that, right? So you couldn't do that when you're on escort duty. And then also only 1 escort per sea zone per alliance is permitted, but it protects all members of the alliance that are aligned, or like they all have to be at war with the same major power. So you couldn't put more than 1 escort duty marker in a zone, and that's between all of your members of your alliance. So you couldn't, this is what I got, one of the things I got wrong in the other video, you couldn't put a French boat on escort duty and an American boat on escort duty in this zone here. You could only put 1 boat on escort duty from anybody in your alliance. And when I say alliance, I'm talking about nations that are aligned, which means that they're on the same side and they're at war with against the same major power, and that's very important. And in this case, the Americans and the British are at war with the same major power. If the Americans weren't at war yet, then I wouldn't have this marker underneath here. And we're just simulating this, right? Nobody's actually at war in this game. Okay, so enemy units may move through a zone with a unit on escort duty when no other ships are present without stopping to engage in combat. So let's just say that you had this boat right here in this sea zone. You could move an entire navy through that sea zone if you wanted, if that was the only boat on your side there. So I mean, I'm talking about an enemy navy. You could move it right through there as if that guy wasn't there, because he's on escort duty. If he wasn't on escort duty, then you'd have to stop and fight that guy, right? So that's a change to that. And then if you develop the one technology up here, this advanced anti-sub warfare here, this one here, let me set this down. then if you've developed that, then you automatically get to make a defense roll at 2 or less against enemy submarine raiding a convoy line where the nation has IPP to lose. So in this case, in this line here, only the British, if they had anti-submarine warfare, they could roll 2 after the rolls have been made for the money, right? After the rating had finished, because after it's done, then your escorts get to fire at the sub, and that's when you would roll a 2, an extra 2 for that for having the anti-sub warfare. So what happens? Let's just summarize that. First of all, the German goes in here and he announces that he's going to convoy raid during the combat movement phase of his turn. Then you have the convoy rating roll. So each player rolls a d6 and adds modifiers from the convoy rating table, and that's right here. I'll show you, and this is on page 45. So there's the convoy rating table at the bottom down there, and it shows +1 for a coastal submarine, +2 for a submarine, +4 for an advanced submarine, and then the convoy modifiers. Those are the escorts. So +1 per escorting surface warship on the convoy line, +2 if at least one friendly aircraft is on combat air patrol in the sea zone, and +2 if you have radar technology. So with this line here, if the British had developed radar technology, and it was like advanced submarine warfare on that chart, it's up there as well, then you would add +2 to the convoy roll as well as far as a modifier. So then, let's talk about these planes on combat air patrol. So what happens is that if you wanted to place one on combat air patrol, one second here. Here it is. I had to pick up the wrong page. Okay, so it's a form of combat movement for aircraft, and the range is generally only 1, but it could be more. Like if you develop the technology to do that, then it could be 2. But for the most part, it's 1. So you got a plane that starts on land here, and you could put it on combat air patrol by going 1 space. And the reason you only go 1 space, and I heard Will, or I've seen Will talking about this. This is Will Henson I'm talking about. He's one of the guys that invented this game. The reason you can't use your full range of movement for planes is that you're not actually just taking a plane and going in a straight line somewhere. Like you're not taking this plane and flying over, all the way over across the water. What you're doing is you're on a search pattern. So you're going back and forth and going in circles and things like that. You're actually searching for submarines. That's the only thing that you're doing, and that's why you can only go 1, because in order to there's a lot of room in this sea zone, right? And so you have to go around and around and around, and you're just searching for submarines. You're not just, okay, let's go to Canada and flying in a straight line across there. And so that's why if you're on combat air patrol, that's why your range is only 1. Because of that, because you're flying around like that. So to start a patrol, you have that one, and you would move out there, and you would use one of these chips. These chips are going to be essential for you to have, because you have to have some way to show that your aircraft are on combat air patrol. So an aircraft on combat air patrol may opt to return to base using its patrol range, which is, like I said, usually 1, during non-combat movement, or you can remain in the sea zone. Like after your turn's over, this plane can stay here on combat air patrol. An aircraft that remains on patrol can defend against units entering the sea zone. An aircraft on combat air patrol may decline to engage in combat with surface ships that do not include an aircraft carrier. So if an aircraft carrier moves in here, they can attack that plane. But if just other kind of ships go in here, then the plane can decide, yes, I will take part in the combat, or no, I'm not going to take part in the combat. And then another thing is that if you are on combat air patrol, like this plane is, it's automatically eliminated if it is ever more than than its patrol range away from an available friendly landing spot. So what that means here is that someone were to take out London, then it would have to be eliminated because there's no other land connected to the sea zone. You can only go one space. So one, that puts you in the water here. One, that puts you in the water here. One. The only place you could possibly land is London. So if while you're out there, somebody comes along and takes London out, then this guy is going to be eliminated because he's too far away. He's going to run out of gas, right? So he's done. And then carrier aircraft, if carrier, it says carrier aircraft must return to their carrier in the non-combat movement phase of each turn and may not remain on patrol. So you could have a carrier aircraft with aircraft on combat air patrol, but they have to return on non-combat movement. It's not like this one where you can leave it until the next turn or 5 turns from now for that matter. You have to bring him back. So that is, that's what combat air patrol is. Now, let's raid this convoy. Where's my dice? I know I've got some here somewhere. So, before I get to it, I'll just show you, I'll just remind you. So this one is +2, that sub, right? If you had a coastal sub here, that would only be +1. If you were using an advanced submarine, that would be +4. But you're using a regular sub, so that's +2. Then you look at how many escorts are on the line, and we have 2, and they're +1 each, so that's 2. Now we could roll the dice and add 2 to each dice, but it's the same thing to say, well, they're even, okay? So let's see who gets more. So in this roll, the black dice will be the German, and the white dice will be the British, and we roll them, and the black dice is 6, and the white dice is 1, so that's 5. 5 for the Germans, right? We're looking at the difference of them. So they took off the maximum amount that they could on that. That's as well as you could do on there. And so the British player loses that 5 IPPs to the bank. They don't give it to the Germans. You remember what happens here, right? Like this guy is sinking ships. So all those supplies are going to the bottom of the ocean. And the 5 that you take off your income simulates that. It's saying, okay, that's how much supplies you lost, and it just goes back to the bank. Yeah, that's it. So anyway, then now that that's done, now the escorts that are on that line get to go after that guy. And the plane doesn't get to go after him because it's only if the plane was on combat air patrol in this zone here. But he's not in that zone. There's kind of, Will was saying also that they wanted to have some space in here where you couldn't put a plane on combat air patrol because that would, historically there was a dead spot in the middle there where there just wasn't enough space or where it was just too far away from the land for you to have planes out there flying around, right? So your range is only 1 and you're flying around in this zone looking for subs. But anyway, you couldn't have put a plane in here. But now it's time for the escorts now that the rating is done. So you would roll your normal to defense values for these boats. So destroyer, we use a 12-sided dice for this. So a destroyer defends at 4 or less, so he gets a 5, so that's a miss. Now the cruiser, the American cruiser, defends at 6 or less, and we roll, and he got a 1. So what happens is that sub's dead. The sub doesn't shoot, only the escorts shoot. The sub, he was concerned with sinking the tankers, right? Or it could be tankers, it could be any kind of merchant ships. He was targeting them. These guys were targeting him. So he gets killed. So the result of this battle is the Germans lose a sub and the British lose 5 IPP. So let's just go down to the other side of the board down there. Let's take a look at this other sub. Give you another example of that. This is another thing that I screwed up on in my other video. I knew the rule. I just screwed it up. So here we've got a sub on Convoy, raiding Convoy, and he has to state which one because he could go all 3 lines if he wanted to. There's this line, and there's this line. But he wants to play it safe, especially since he saw that guy get killed. So he knows that there's one escort there, and that's that escort up there, right? He knows that there's an escort on this line. He's over there, that one on the yellow marker. But this line down here doesn't have anything on it, right? Here's where the line ends. This is the Cape Town to London line, and so he's going to raid that line. And the most he can get off that line here, you see, is 3, and it's only from the British. So it's going to be the German and the British player that are rolling for it. So first we add our modifiers, and we know there's no escort, so there's no plus on the British side, but we're using a regular sub, so that's a +2 on the German side. So we're going to roll both dice again, but we're going to add 2 to the German dice. So we add, oh, look at that. That's 6 and 1 again. And so that's 8 and 1, so that's 7, but you couldn't take off more than 3. Okay? So the British are going to lose 3 here. So they lost 3 here, and they lost, what was it, 5 up there. So they lost 8 on there. So the Germans did end up coming out ahead on that, because a sub costs less than 8, right? Mm-hmm. But you know, like you just let's just roll this again. So here, the British rolled a 5, and these guys rolled a 2. But you add 2 to that, that would have come out 4. So Germany's -1 there, so nothing happens. Germany doesn't lose any money on that one, right? It's just if the Germans need to come out ahead in order to take that much money. So like if Germany had rolled a 4 and you add a 2 to that, then that would be 6 versus 5. So the British would have lost 1. Okay, is that clear as mud to you? Anyway, that's how that worked. When I was rolling the dice yesterday, I forgot to roll the British dice on this one. So I think they actually did better in this. The Germans did better this time anyway, because rolling 6 versus 1, you can't do better than that when you're raiding a convoy, right? Anyway, so that is my video on convoy raiding. What I'll do is I'll upload this video and I'll delete the other video and replace it with this one. So anyway, if I make really huge egregious errors in the rules, and then I'll replace the videos like that. Couple of small errors, and I'm not going to. Like I did make an error on my land combat video. When I placed all the units on the battle board, when you're on attack, you get to upscale your one infantry paired with an artillery. I upscaled the defending artillery or defending infantry as well on an attack, and I knew that you couldn't do that. It's just like I said, when you're making a video, you got all these things in your mind and running through your head, and you're trying to read something, and you're trying to do your camera work and everything, and so you screw it up. So if you watch that video, just know that that doesn't happen. Your defending infantry aren't upscaled by 1 with your artillery. It's only the attacking infantry. Anyway, that's it for my convoy raiding video. So take care, everyone. General Hand Grenade out.